What's up there, workforce? Chris here.
Brian here.
And we are going to be talking a little bit about community feedback. For those of you new here, and it is wonderful to see so many new faces around, this is something that we do. We try to do it weekly. We're not horribly great about that. But this is a chance to go back and go through the comments and continue the conversation more than we can in just a reply or something like that, and give context to where we start to see trends in the comments, or somebody leaves just a really intriguing comment and we want to kind of bring that to light. And so today's is going to be talking about two videos. The first is, should we stop paid expansions? The idea that, is there a reason that we still pay every 2 years for an expansion as opposed to just increasing the sub to account for whatever their development cost is? And then the second side of that, a similar conversation, is should we go back and rebuild ARR? Is there a reason to go back after a time and rehash old expansions under a new development and probably build new zones into them while you're there? So Brian, do you want to go ahead and read the first comment?
All right. Our first comment's coming from John JS. He says, "No, trust me. You'll want to keep it paid. It will go downhill in quality and function-wise if you don't. If you play other games, you'll see where I'm coming from." And so first, I want to kind of jump in on John's comment, because I actually don't necessarily agree that quality or function could go down. That's all about operations and function and price, because essentially you look at the expansions. If that were true, they would keep the expansion price pretty much locked. But you see that, especially after a couple of months, that price is going to drop, because ultimately they want people in the game, and they ultimately want the subscription numbers. The subscription numbers, hands down, are more important than the one-time every 2-year fee. Now, it does help offset cost. But one of the things when I watched Chris's video, and I did want to point out to everybody, is that there is a high probability that the reason why it is paid and why we have that expectation is due to taxes. Within development, there are two kinds of categories for taxes. I don't know if this translates one-to-one over to the Japanese market, but I can just speak to it as an American, and what we see when we do development is that there is capital and then there's operational. And so operational, you think of maintenance of the servers, you think of keeping the servers online, you keep of any development that's going on during that part. And a capital expense is something where you take money that is outside of the operational cost and inject it into the game, and you're going to then have this deliverable, something measurable, saying we spent 50 million or 10 million or 1 million, and we have a new quote-unquote product, something that we have inserted into it that is standalone, aka the expansion, because just updating the thing wouldn't tax-wise qualify as a capital expense. The reason why you want capital versus operational, this is such a nerd, I'm nerding out on taxes, is because of the tax code, especially here in the United States, is that you have a much lower tax rate on capitalized expenses, because they want to encourage continual investment, and operations is taxed a different rate. Don't know if that's exactly what they're doing here, but that could essentially be one key pivotal thing as to why we actually still pay for expansions. Because Chris's point is, they could just bake that all into the cost of the expansion, and they could even, you could sunset somebody to say, you have to be at least subscribed for the last year to qualify for a free expansion. We're just going to give you the expansion for free.
Until June after it, or until December after it drops. So
right.
Drop in June, you
gotta
pay for December.
Yeah, some kind of they could do really whatever they want financially without sacrificing quality or function or any of that. That's just a numbers game. And my phone's singing at me. Chris, any follow up to John JS here?
Yeah, I do think that, as far as quality and function, one of the things you touched on there is kind of the idea of investment. And so one of the questions is, would it have the same flash for investors? Because this time of year, we've been seeing all the earnings calls coming out from the first quarter, seeing EA, seeing Activision and things like that. And one of the things these games really categorize themselves by is monthly active users. And they don't do it annually, they do it quarterly.
Yeah.
So in my mind, while there may be tax incentives that I am totally not aware of, not a developer, then at least from an investment standpoint, I could see maybe there are some pros there in the fact that you're able to keep monthly active users high quarter to quarter to quarter to quarter, because this model actually encourages them to make bigger content patches later in, because even if they were to up the cost from $60 to expansion to $72, because they're going to divide it out and they assume that you unsubscribe some of those, and so you're like, wow, but I haven't unsubscribed a single month in the last 2 years, that screws me. A little bit on the dollars, but on the other side of that, it's now Square Enix's job to make a case for why you should never unsubscribe for even a single month. And so now, instead of just like locking you within like, oh, you bought a house and you can't quit, now they can do that to everybody and say like, we're going to continually deliver enormous content patches because we only make money if you don't take a break from 5.1 to 5.4. And so that'd be something that I think would actually kind of work out both ways. The next comment, though, is from Elijah. Because I've played free-to-play games, and now that I have a job, I want quality over quantity. And so we got a lot of these comments. Some of them got deleted pretty quickly, so I'm assuming that they were kind of commenting and then watching the video, and then they were like, oh, that's not what he's talking about. But I just want to make it clear, in case I didn't phrase it clearly, I'm not implying at all that the total amount of money that I give over to Square Enix goes down. If anything, I'm saying that if they could consider delivering bigger content patches throughout the cycle, I personally would be willing to pay more. That's why I have more than 2 retainers. But I think that what they could do instead is, instead of I have this one $72 month every 2 years, and then the rest of the time they're like $12 or $15 or whatever it works out to when you buy it in bulk, I could instead say, you know, I just need one annualized budget. My wife and I do our budget month over month, and we do it kind of a year out as far as like a plan. And so I have to sit there and I have to say, okay, I pay $15 a month, but then I also need every other year a $60 lump sum. And for, you know, and the fact that I play multiple games like this, I play WoW, it's like those really add up. And so it would be a lot easier for me to budget, even when I was a kid on allowance, to say like, this is how much I need this month and break it out kind of like a layaway program.
It's like prepay for your expansion starting right now, and thus it's free. Imagine if that was just an opt-in feature, right? Just imagine it like how you opt in right now to your retainers, to additional retainers. Imagine if you were able to say opt into, well, let me just add in this, you know, $2 a month or $5 a month additional fee, and then and that's me already pre-ordering the expansion. And then I can opt in and opt out, and as soon as you hit, I don't know. It probably gets more complex than they would want to admit. But I want to jump to Kylo B. He says, you pay a subscription to cover the constant upkeep and maintenance, plus patches to keep the game running smoothly. You pay for the expansion because it's basically a whole game worth of content. And I absolutely agree with Kylo. Like, the expansions are these whole games, especially in 14's case, where 14 I think is really special in what it delivers. And actually was talking with like Dustin Liguri about it, is that it's with the serialized nature, it has its strengths and its weaknesses, and they offset the weaknesses with the jump potion, because it is this like, here's chapter 1, here is chapter 2, here is chapter 3, and so the next expansion is like, you know, the next, you know, epic movie that, like, I don't expect to go in to the new Star Wars and be like, I paid for the previous Star Wars. Like, what do you mean you want me to pay for the new chapter, right? So it's a whole, like, and then what they do, I feel like they do deliver on that. If Shadowbringers did not feel like it's brand spanking new, like, story, characters, you know, chapter in and of the overall, you know, universe, then I think that's where we get into, like, is this really, what really is an expansion versus what is a DLC content update? And I think Destiny is the biggest offender of this, because they have things they call expansions, and then they have things that are expansions. Chris.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, and I think it really leans heavily on, like, that actually kind of better describes the taxation model you were talking about earlier. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump to the next one here, because we got a lot of comments. FairyStar says, well, one issue I see where you don't understand people who don't want this expansion, why would they play and then not want to, like, proceed? People who are like level 49 right now, maybe they haven't bought Shadowbringers yet because they don't plan on being that kind of level cap. They say, but you kind of missed the point that some people might want to quit because they don't like the expansion, and the fee scheme says that they've already kind of paid for that expansion in advance. So I actually kind of view it the other way. They deliver the expansion and then we pay as we go. And so I really only have to pay for it if I stick around. And so I pay for an expansion as a 2-year cycle, not just the initial 5.0 serving. I also pay for 5.1 and 5.3 and 5.5, you know, and the evens are important too, but the odds always have felt a little bit bigger to me. Those are the ones I really pay for. And so those are the ones.
The Savage Raiders all agree with you.
I mean, I just feel like we get a lot of content.
The evens, yeah.
And so that's just kind of how I think of it. And this comment, I grabbed this and I was hoping to grab one a little bit similar to it, because it does start to kind of break apart, where I noticed some people kind of felt like, well, this is very much a us versus them. Like you're saying, well, people who only want to pay the initial serving and then don't come back to the next expansion pay less. And right now they have to pay for the expansion. So it kind of penalizes them for quitting because they have this one really expensive month and then they bail. And I don't really view it that way, because Brian and I have maintained pretty consistent subs since like 2.0.
Even 1.0.
Well, yeah, you've been around forever.
I'm ancient.
He's been around since the prequel. He's a cheaper sub because of it.
I do.
As an apology for what they did. So I think that can't really be the long-term mentality. You can't sit here and say, like, it's not fair. Just same with the jump potions and the skip potions. You can't sit here and say, well, everybody should have to do what I did. Everybody, I biked uphill both ways, and so they should have to too. It's like, no, we have to move forward. It's the same when you talk about politics or debt forgiveness or any of those things. People have this like, well, I did something where I met my social contract and you aren't having to, and that's not fair because it lessens my experience. And I don't really think so. Like, I agreed during ARR to pay $60 bucks, I think it was, and then $15 a month for the duration of 2 years if I wanted to play that whole time. And I was given an experience for that time that no new player can go back and mimic, because that was current content at the time. And then I did it again in Heavensward, and then I did it again in Stormblood. And so a new player coming in today, whether they pay or don't pay, and whether they level up or don't level up, they don't get to go back and take my experience from me. They don't get to go back and take the fun I had and all the joy I had. Even if they play the same content, it's not really the same now. So I don't really think that when this starts to drop into an us and them.
I keep laughing because I was looking around for a Bible. I couldn't find one that said like St. Michael. But I was like, this sounds so much like a story, a parable from the Bible about the guy who got hired
yes.
who gets hired at the end of the day, and everybody's like, what the heck? Like, we all worked a day and he gets paid exactly like what we got paid. That's just what came to mind. I couldn't help but chuckling. I think though there's a risk here. I want to bring up the kind of the other side of the coin, kind of the risk in kind of that sense of investment, because there is a sense of pride of like I did this. EverQuest players would say, like, I remember, like, I have a friend, like, I woke the sleeper. It's like there are phrases and there are times in history of things that happen. Like, as for me, as an example, I have an experience that can't be reproduced. Nobody can right now go play 1.0 and have the experience that I had. Now, with players coming into the game, they can have the experience I had in ARR. They can have the experience I had in Heavensward. They can have the up to the point, but like, they're new. Like, all of this is new. They're experiencing the game, and so for me, like, there's a sense that I get that experience. From the side of investment, though, we're going to be going into a new expansion, and I think players like myself, players who've been around for a long time, that if that cycle feels so much the same, where for a new player they're going to experience and love it, for a veteran it's just going to feel like you're on the same wheel, like, just like, okay, they changed out, like if you're a hamster and you have a little backdrop or whatever for an image, all they did was did they just replace the image? Am I still on the same treadmill, and am I still having fun with it? And so hopefully we can start to see kind of a balance when it comes to that terms of investment, without punishing new players for starting years later, because you don't want to stop the flow of new players. That's good. We want to hopefully try to sit here and find that value of investment. And who knows? We'll have to see. Maybe we get the opportunity to ask Yoshi P about that here in a couple weeks. We'll find out. All right. So our next comment comes from Anika Analyst. I apologize. I destroyed your name. I think it might be missing the expansion hype. Or I think you might be missing the expansion hype. If we got expansions as just bigger patches, there wouldn't be as much hype about it. Sometimes you need to package things and get new players ready to attack or attract back the old players. I joined at the ends of Heavensward, and I truly came back and I played for real thanks to the Stormblood hype. Because of the Stormblood trailer, because of the Stormblood Wade and the Stormblood lore pre-theories, and I see the same thing happening with Shadowbringers for a lot of people. So that extra expansion cost is also marketing cost, and the feeling that I bought this and you don't makes I feel like you're one of the true fans, than just letting the sub fee tick on. What do you think here? Because I think she's kind of spun on about the hype thing, right?
Yeah. I kind of agree with that. I mean, one of the other methods that I didn't talk about in this that you're starting to see games like WoW has done this, and Final Fantasy seems to be headed in that direction, is where you make like the base game free. It's right now it's a free trial up to a certain point, but then you start to say like as long as you're subbed, you get everything up to the current expansion because, like you said, up to what we consider the hype, what that feeling of missing out, and that just this is what we're currently working on. So like if you want to churn through my old stuff and you want to pay me $15 a month, we're square, don't worry about it.
Right.
And so it's a valid point. I mean, I don't really have anything to disagree with it. I just kind of wondered if anybody else had ever wondered why we suddenly pay these big lump sums instead of there being, maybe you pay $10 for each content cycle, or you pay just a bigger sub fee consistently. Like, why is it that every game seems to be like one of these same few pay models? Why isn't there a bigger variety of pay models?
Well, I'm with you 100% actually on the pay model, and that might actually be a let's discuss kind of a discussion video, because essentially one of the things that I think that's underlying about this topic is the fact that the subscription model is dying. It is going away, and at some point, meaning when you sub to a specific game, and somebody might be out there going like, no, I don't want this game to be free. Not saying that it's going to be free whatsoever. What I'm saying is that when you look at Microsoft, Sony, EA, they're all building out this subscription platform. You're not subscribed to one game. You're subscribed to a package of games. And I would be really surprised if we don't see Square Enix throw their hat in the ring on this one when it comes to 11, Dragon Quest X, Final Fantasy XIV, insert any other Square Enix published from a variety of it, because essentially when we talk about the daily active users and all those things, and unfortunately the subscription model for MMOs has fundamentally, like when you look at the volume, when you're talking about billions of dollars being made in Fortnite and millions being made in Final Fantasy, I would say Final Fantasy is fundamentally a better game. I'm biased. But what is something that kind of keeps that away? Now, the subscription model keeps out a lot of people who are going to just come in and troll, especially in a very communal game, in a persistent game, totally different types. So hopefully the point that I'm trying to make is that I wouldn't be surprised within not the next year, but maybe within the next 10 years, if we don't see them shift off of like your sub to 14 and you would then just be sub to Square Enix and you get more benefits for it. I don't know if it's going to be the same price. I'm sure they probably try to find, maybe it'd be at a value of $20 a month, but your subscription to Square Enix, in general would net you all these games. And because people want that reoccurring revenue, they want those daily active users. They want to be able to count that if you go play Final Fantasy VII Remake, or if you go play a single-player game or a multiplayer game, you're still a part of their ecosystem as a part of the Square Enix daily active users, because that's what a lot of investors are actually more intrigued with. When it talks about streaming, it talks about this availability, we talk about the cloud. There's some big changes that are coming down the road. You can mark it here. If this is the first time you're hearing of it, note to self, like mark today on the calendar if you disagree with me, and let's come back here, take a look at it. And if I'm wrong, I'll happily come back and say, like, look at this idiot who thought that they were going to do that in the next decade. It just seems to make the most logical sense. I'm sure that they'll probably still keep the sub model. Like, you can just sub to 14 for $14.99. Or essentially the value. Yeah, the value proposition is going to be what people convert to, in my opinion. We'll have to wait and see, though. Like, it's going to be interesting to see what happens at this E3, especially with xCloud and many other things like that nature, because I think we're going to see Stadia, xCloud, a lot of things driving the market into a different direction.
EA's doing really well with Origin monthly users. So like as you watch these services start to roll out, and then you look at partnerships like the Heavens, ARR was free for Amazon Prime members. It's like, okay, so is it $20 a month for Square Enix, or $10 if you add it to your Amazon Prime membership? And so like it's really easy to see how these partnerships could get them access where you start to merge these monthly active users and you start to form these kind of what used to be cable packages, but more a build your own.
Yeah.
So the last comment here from Daryl is, no, I know free-to-play games work, but I just hate all the microtransactions. So we talked a little bit about the free-to-play part. That's not what I was saying at all. But the microtransactions, I do want to point out, a lot of times we are quick to point out when Diablo Immortal and all these microtransaction stuff. If you do not know, Square Enix loves microtransactions. If you have not gone out to the App Store and typed in Square Enix, I think you would be blown away that it is not just one entry, it is not just two entries. Like, they keep putting things out here. Like Record Keeper alone, I have friends who have spent literally the amount they've spent on that game has a comma. Like, it is silly how much they've spent. And so there are so many microtransactions out there.
14 has microtransactions.
14 has microtransactions.
And then maybe they're not so micro.
Well, and yeah, and then like I would not be shocked to see the Regalia when this event ends for the 15 crossover move to being a paid mount.
And probably $24.99 if you're lucky.
Oh, it's 4-person. It could be $35. They have no shame in that. So when we say like, hold on.
No shame. Let's people are paying for it. It's like if you are sitting here and somebody comes up to you and they're like, "Sir, can I hand you money and can I take that hot dog out of your hand?" And you're like, "Well, sure." You know, it's like it's not the publisher. Yeah, I don't ever blame the publisher for somebody sitting here saying like, well, people have like, why do people go and buy gold? Like the biggest thing, in my opinion, this is gonna be a freaking can of worms. The problem is that if people didn't purchase fake money, if people didn't go out and break the accounts, using bots to buy houses, breaking terms of service, buying gil, like if there is people who are willing to pay for it, that's why a market exists. It's whether it's legal or whatnot. I think there are anyway. It just
we sit here and we criticize like, oh man, I hope Blizzard doesn't add all these microtransactions, but like we sit here and we play from other developers that do. Square and they're really open about it, so I appreciate that it's not a bunch of like manipulative. We're gonna game you into like a loot box that's gonna be like a coupon code, and you go out to the website and it's like now the Regalia is only $34 for you,
or you can trade it in. Thankfully, it's not that. There are people though, man. I swear
not. And so. If you think our game isn't full of microtransactions, they still sell dyes, right?
Yes. Dyes, Fantasia potions, gear, mounts. There is a market for it, and essentially that's where I think people there is a sense of ownership that we have with our subscription fees. There's a sense of this. Well, it does keep people out that aren't going to enjoy it. There are people who could I would play this game, but it is a hurdle. I hope personally that we never see Final Fantasy XIV go to a free to play model. I think it would be horrible. I think I don't like free to play games personally. There are some that have some exceptions where I feel like at least it's tuned correctly, but no matter what, always gives you the impression because they have to make money. If I love this game so much, why did it shut down? Well, nobody paid them anything, and then eventually they had to either choose to feed their families or go do something else, and they chose to feed their families. It's like you're not giving people much of a choice. I think that it's going to be interesting to see with what's been recently introduced legally, where they're going to be looking at stopping paid progression market, within the government stepping in to do the ESRB's job. Personally, I don't I'd rather that we had the ESRB for a reason. They backed the publishers because the money was just too daggum good, almost cursed. And so now we're going to have to see probably what the government does if they do anything to kind of step in and kind of help prevent and protect impressionable people from the gambling that this is. I don't care. Oh, it's it's like, no, guys, it's the same concept. It really does frustrate me. Here, let me get my soapbox. But no, I don't think this. I just want to be clear because I'm dreading the comment. You want this game to be free to play? Not at all. The game does have microtransactions. I think I'm going to be surprised if the microtransaction store doesn't show up in the game at some point. That would be truly shocking because right now it's interesting because from a microtransactions, you have to go outside the game to do it. And that in and of itself, when you look at other games, the other games try to make it as easy as possible to spend money. I get the opposite impression of Square Enix. I get the opposite of, I'm trying to give you money and they're like, I don't know if we want it.
Have you guys ever gotten a new credit card? I got a new card number and it was, I literally called Brian. I was like, Brian, I think I have to quit. I think I have to quit Final Fantasy. He's like, what are you talking about? I was like, I can't, my bank sent me a new card. And they're like, hey, it was a security thing. We decided to send out and it has a new number. And I don't I can't find the spot on the website. Square won't take my money. And so they're not forcing it on anybody. And I think that the subscription and the steady paycheck is what allows them to do things like invest in story and dungeons and raids and things that microtransactions really, they would have to focus more on glamour and race changes and things like that. And that doesn't have the depth of content that I expect from a subscription game. So moving on to the next video here, the Should We Start Over? Rebuilding ARR. Oscar Fernandez, this isn't WoW. We don't need to rework zones like Cataclysm. Look back at Cataclysm and how it affected the game. Doing reworks massively like that will be hit hard with the community. If they're going to rework or fix the old zones, it would be realistic. Yoshi P has said he talked about adding flying to old zones many times, but the priority isn't high at all. So I wanted to touch briefly on kind of the WoW part, and then I'll let WoW respond more. Let Brian respond more to the comment.
You can call me WoW. I'm pretty.
So World of Warcraft had several expansions that first released in 2004, and it never had a 1.0 and a 2.0. So the original code was still in game. We went from vanilla. They didn't know how the game would do. They said they would definitely shut it off before it got to level 100. You know, that it would one day have flying and it didn't on launch. That it would one day have PvP and it didn't on launch. And so like it was a really feature lacking thing, but it was innovative for its time, so it did incredibly well. They moved into the Burning Crusade, and by then they had added a bunch of the features that were originally on the box art. I still have my 2004 box. And then they'd actually expanded it to be all these new things. That was the best time in WoW, in my opinion. We moved into Wrath of the Lich King, which was our first expansion designed around flying. So flying was required to get to different parts of the world, heavily so. Not just like, oh, there's a couple islands. It's like, no, there's whole zones. We're like, yeah, you got to fly up to that ledge for this quest. And then it was like, okay, we've made all this progression. Oh my gosh, look at our original code when we didn't even know if this would work. Like, look at our original zones. These are garbage. And somebody said, why don't you just add flying? And they're like, no, you don't understand. Like, the tops of buildings aren't rendered. The tops of trees don't have textures. Like, we were operating on so little. They actually talked about in a panel that when something didn't have a texture, they had it just default to white, and they were using that as a way to save on space so that for lights, they could just remove textures and it would show. And so when they're rebuilding for Vanilla Classic and they moved it to that pink and black squares that we're used to seeing for missing texture now, they said you run out in the world, there's just all these nasty areas where like just poor craftsmanship, either because it was optimized that way or because it just never got fixed, was all over the world. So they've had this huge issue of going back and fixing issues that were there from 2004. And so Cataclysm was a chance to go back and rebuild that, revamp the way we do quests with everything we've learned about quest building, add height to the map and redo all the buildings so that it flies. But they left a lot of the original zones intact. So a lot of your original quest givers were there and things like that. But remember, WoW Vanilla didn't have MSQ. So they did have the opportunity, if they chose to go and do things like take a zone that was really popular like the Barrens and split it into the northern and southern Barrens with a giant cataclysmic rift, go back and take a really iconic dungeon, Scarlet Monastery, strip it to shreds, and now we have this new Scarlet Monastery. So there's no way to go experience the Scarlet Monastery I grew up with. It's gone. When I said this about Final Fantasy, like, yeah, that they wouldn't have to do all those things. They would want to protect MSQ. They would want to protect original things because actually their 2.0 is a lot stronger than vanilla WoW was. So yes, it hit the community. I'm not saying mimic the other aspects of Cataclysm. I'm just saying that, and they haven't had to do it since, because whatever they did it modular enough that from that point forward, they've been able to fly in every expansion, even Warlords of Draenor, where they said, we are not going to have flying. And they released it, dropped a huge amount of subs, and said, all right, fine, we'll add flying. They didn't have to rebuild it because it had that capability, even though they didn't intend to offer the feature. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of a monologue about catching people up on like where World of Warcraft is coming from. I'll let Brian respond to the actual comments.
So I've been definitely a proponent of a new, calamity. I've been not necessarily does it need to have that fundamental shift, but I think from a technological perspective, when we talk about the game being, it's going to be 10 years, since announced at this E3. So here in a couple more years, a couple more expansions, we're talking the game life has going to be 12, 14, 16 years. We do know that there is a new project that Yoshi P has had in pre-production since 2016, and it's now out of pre-production. So, 4 or 5 years from now, depending on the type of game, if it's a multiplayer game, I would expect that we're going to see that. If that game, that one of two things that could be, in my opinion, if it's multiplayer and if it relates to 14, if there's going to be another chapter shift at the telling of the story, let's say we're going back in Shadowbringers and we prevent the Sundering, or we have so many calamities. Like if we're going to eventually get to where they said we're going, which is Zodiark, there's got to be something that changes that has that staying impact. Now, Does that mean narratively that goes forward? I think the smart thing they're doing is they're taking us to the first rather than fundamentally shifting the playing field. If we go and destroy the Garlean Empire and we still see the Garleans running around in their forts, the question within the game itself right now is why are they still at their castrums? We've destroyed them. Well, there's some, offshoots that still believe. It's like, no, like lore-wise, story-wise, like if our actions are actually going to have some form of impact, then we're talking about some form of calamity. And then with that calamity, if we're ever going to have another one, which I would venture to bet that it's a possibility, because then you get the team excited. You put them on a new engine in a new generation. You can say goodbye to the PS3 art assets. You can say goodbye to these things, and you can put everybody on a new starting period and a new story, like they've already done from 1 to 2. Is that possibility likely? Probably not. There is a lot of risk there. There is a lot of cost there. There's a lot of development there, and so. Honestly, I am along for the ride to find out what they're literally going to do. But when we talk about it, what I said about it when I watched Chris's video, I say either do it all, like go big, or go home. Don't just add flying, to those zones. If you're going to add flying to those zones, add something to fly to. Add something of value to that. If I'm just going to fly over those zones, I'm going to miss out a lot of the beauty of ARR in those zones. So that's kind of where I come from. I look at it and say, I don't know if they will. I kind of, there's a part of me that hopes they do with 6.0. I think that kind of makes sense. After whatever we do within the first, something with the narrative needs to get us to Zodiark. I don't know. And we do know we need quote unquote calamities to do that. Or if we end up undoing the Sundering within, within the teases of Shadowbringers, that could fundamentally change the landscape. Then the question is this a new starting point for everybody? Or is this a new starting point? Or do people have to play through that narrative to get to where everybody is narratively? That's going to be up to the development team, foundationally. But I look at it from a technological perspective. Like I said, if you look at what's coming, a new generation of consoles, new generation of PCs, new engines, new, that there is a sense that if they are building out something, it is a long ways away. And there could be that, justification to saying, hey, 14 gets to continue. And maybe they don't shut down the existing. Maybe they say, go play through, this package of 14. And then when you're ready, you can step into 17, which is a direct sequel, or 14.2, whatever. There's so many ways they can go about it. Like I said, I'm along for the ride. I can't make a prediction here because I know I'm going to look back and be like, what a moron.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways they could go with this. Mm-hmm. Moving on to Astaroth K, the way I'd actually do this is have an expansion take you back through ARR as its very own expansion, with some areas like Coerthos Lowlands, Galmora, Silda, and the other half of Mordona added, but a bunch of dungeons that build on Eorzean lore brought into the 2.0 areas. That way you bring in the old and the new in the same areas. The downside of this is it means there'd be a whole expansion that we aren't moving the story forward, and it would need to focus on shoring up defenses, repairing damage. And honestly, in my opinion, this comment really hits on the head. If we're going to have things matter, then things have to happen. You can't just going, we averted catastrophe, and then 2 years, we averted catastrophe, and then 2 years, and we averted catastrophe. It's okay, at some point, we either have to fail or we have to accidentally cause something, or... And so if that takes us back, and then as Brian was saying, it doesn't mean we have to do it in our Thanalan. We could do it in a different Thanalan. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that we explore zones and they're different, 1.0 Coerthos, I just thought this comment was interesting because it talked about Coerthos. Coerthos didn't look like the same Coerthos when you started playing.
It was beautiful. It was like rolling hills, no snow. That's one of the things with the ethereal attunement. Lore time. The ethereal attunement within Coerthos has thrown it off. It's thrown it into kind of a winter, because if you also then look at the zones around it, it has completely different climates. It's not that it's all in this snowy region. It's just that the calamity has caused an ethereal shift in its attunement, and is causing all kinds of problems, and thus this eternal winter that they're suffering. And it'd be neat to see if we were able to restore Coerthos into its previous form, because it was a beautiful zone.
And the expansion could be a prequel, right? We could go back in time, because one of the things that WoW does, like, talking about what that feature added, is by then they had the ability to instance things, and Final Fantasy does now too. And so you can literally talk to a person and it says, like, go to the way Silithus was. And you can go back and play Silithus as the old version of Silithus. You go talk to that person again, and it goes, take me to the present. And then you're back in the current content. And so there's no reason that they couldn't say, there's an expansion that we want to go back and experience parts of 1.0. We're not going to see the ending, because Yoshi P guaranteed that was something that only legacy players got to live through, and he would never re-implement it in the game. But maybe you do go back to a green, beautiful Coerthas, and that's either in a different shard or that's just in a different kind of instance. But I think it would be really neat to have reasons for new players and old players to be in the same place, because what happens is, as content gets really old, and it's one of the things I'm excited about for the trust system, is it just gets left behind. And then it's just this wasteland as soon as we're done with it. And so it'd be nice to give us a reason to go back, and it'd be nice to build in ways for people to not feel so lonely when they're running around as a lower level character.
Yeah, I absolutely agreed. But there's a lot here. There's a lot to unpack. Honestly, I think it was a really interesting topic. Both topics, both on should we rebuild and should we, start, stop paying for expansions. All in, like, this is a great time. Like, at the end of the day, we're all hyped. Everybody's like excited about Shadowbringers. There's a lot we don't know. Personally, I'm really interested to see about these other shards, because they've been talked about. I'm hopeful we'll start to get some of these things that, for me, have been going on for the last 9 years. These stories, what's going on with, like the Ascians, like, can we get some answers? Fundamentally, it's going to be fun. So ultimately, yeah, like my thing is we're along the ride. Thanks everybody so much for all your amazing comments. We really appreciate them. Chris, you got any final thoughts?
That's my dog's doorbell.
Dog's ready to come inside.
Yep. No. Thank you guys so much. It's been fun having these conversations about where we think the game could go from here, where we should go from here. The great thing is that what we all have in common is that we all love playing Final Fantasy XIV, and we all can't wait to get our hands on Shadowbringers.
All right. Well, anyway, for WorkToGame, my name's Brian.
My name's Chris.
And his dog is ready to come inside. We'll see you next time.
All right. Take care.
Hey, it's me. It's been a while since I talked to you guys directly this way, but don't tell anybody. We've got even more epic content planned for this channel. The response has been incredible. We hope to see you. If you're new, hit subscribe, leave us a comment. I'd like to talk to you more about video games. I can't seem to speak my language. All right.